All right, so Jeremy, what do you got to drink?
Currently drinking an organic kombucha ginger lemonade flavor.
All right, well, I have, this is Brothers Bond Bourbon with a cherry, a slice of orange, an ice cube, and a sugar cube. This is a cup of coffee. And this is a bottle of water, because I just don't know which one I'm going to be in the mood for as we go along. Welcome to Matters With. I'm your host, PhillipBrian. Today we're here to discuss 22 matters with you. Well, not 22 individual matters, the year 22, because I don't say 2022 anymore. At least I try not to say 2022 anymore because I dropped the 20. It's just 22. So, welcome to Matters With. I'm your host, PhillipBrian. We're here to discuss 22 entertainment matters with Jeremy Blake and you.
Hello, PhillipBrian. I feel like this episode should actually be called Catch 22.
That's better. Catch 22. I like that. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to discuss entertainment recommendations from 22. I'm going to recommend 2 things in each subject matter, and Jeremy's going to do the same. I tried to position the camera to where when I'm looking at you, it still seems like I'm looking at the camera, but now that we're doing this, I see that I'm shifting my eyes. So I'm going to have shifty eyes. I'm not trying to sell anyone a car.
Yeah, me too.
We're gonna start with song. So what's a song from 22? This would be your honorable mention, by the way.
Song that I heard in 2022 is by Imagine Dragons. It's called No Time for Toxic People. It's a great title, and it's a great message.
All right. No Time for Toxic People. I'm going to see when that came out.
Probably 2021.
So we're going to let that one slide. We have a category for that for later, by the way. That's why I'm giving you a little grief about it. That's fine.
I won't pick that for that category.
Okay. All right. So what's your top song? What song came out in 22 that you like the most or recommend the most?
There is a Paint It Black cover in the series Wednesday on Netflix that is done on the cello. And I believe the actress actually took the time to learn to play the cello for that role. One of those moments where you're like, I think I recognize this song. What is that? And then it's like, that's the Rolling Stones, but on a cello.
Nice. I realized I was behind on some stuff too. And there was a couple times I'm like, did that song come out this year? Was that last year? Was that the year before? Was that 10 years before? But I did verify that both of these came out in 22. And my runner-up, Black Summer by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Love it. But my number one song of 22, and this is from a completely different field, and this is the influence of being around people who pick different radio stations than me, is As It Was by Harry Styles. That song gets stuck in my head, and I don't mind. So that's what I'm going with. What was your favorite movie score or soundtrack from 22?
It is not going to be from a movie, but I believe it should count as a score or a soundtrack. It's going to be from the video game Eldin Ring. The beauty of it is you can play the game and the soundtrack never steals from the game, but as you replay parts of it, you'll realize how the soundtrack goes along with the game so well. As things are moving along, as your character is moving through certain areas, the soundtrack is always complementing it, and you can go back and listen to the soundtrack and you can see what you were doing at that time in your head because it's that good of a game and that good of a soundtrack.
Okay. The soundtrack of Eldin Ring. So you said that, and it made me think of a quote from Dave Grohl where he talks about what's a truly great drummer, and that's a drummer who sits in the song and complements the song and doesn't actually distract from the song. The
I would
number
say
one.
He's got authority.
What was number one?
That was number one.
Okay.
The runner-up is actually from the Batman.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's a perfect segue. My honorable mention or runner-up is the soundtrack / score from The Batman. I think it creates a perfect mood for that movie and was truly great. However, and I know I'm in the minority on this, and I understand that it would not be as big of a hit financially, but from the moment I saw the first trailer to watching the movie, I always felt that was felt more like a post-Batman Jason Todd story than a Batman second year story. And that's my own personal view of that whole movie, but that soundtrack is phenomenal. My number one soundtrack for the year, though, that I most recommend is from Elvis, because it is a tremendous blend of music from today and music from Elvis's prime that just combine to tell a tremendous story in and of itself without the movie. And the movie's good too. All right, so let's go to a little bit of a change of pace. It's a YouTube channel. So let's go with your honorable mention first of a YouTube channel that you highly recommend that is currently running.
Runner up. There is a streamer. His channel's name is Maximilian Dood, Dood. And he primarily plays fighting video games, but he also does a lot of just video game reviews where he does full playthroughs and offers much more in-depth opinions. But he's also just very entertaining.
All right. I'm not familiar with that channel. I'll give it a watch. What you call it? Maximilian Dude?
Yes. He's got quite a following, so I'm sure he'll pop up.
Now that you've mentioned him, he'll absolutely pop up. What's your number one recommended YouTube channel for the year?
My number one YouTube channel for 2022, or just 22, is Brandon Sanderson. He is an author, if you're not familiar. And one thing I really like about him as an author is he consistently puts out updates about what he is doing related to his writing, related to his projects. I won't spoil it, but it's worth going and looking up on his channel. I think it's titled something along the lines of I've Been Lying to You. If you've heard of the Wheel of Time series, he is the one who finished it. He wrote the last, I think, 3 books after the original author passed away.
I'm going to check that out. I'm not familiar with that author. As far as my favorite YouTube channel, my runner-up is a channel that I was really torn on which one was my runner-up versus which one is my winner. But my runner-up is the Outlaw Nation. Because no matter what you like, there's something on the Outlaw Nation for you. Because he does a lot of stuff regarding, big action-packed movies like the Marvel, DC, Star Wars, all of that. He covers that to quite a bit of extent. He also covers sports, and he also covers Hollywood breaking news. There's just a lot on that channel. So almost no matter what I'm looking for, this one channel has a lot of those features. So that's the Outlaw Nation. My number one is Answers with Joe. He covers history and science and biographies, and he does so extremely well. He's also quite funny, and it's a lot of entertainment just to watch. I have turned on his channel and let it run in the background for hours on end, and I'm always learning something. So that's my number one recommendation is Answers with Joe. Moving along to something a little bit different. It's kind of a taste of the past. You mentioned this earlier, is what is something in 22 that didn't come out in 22 that you discovered in 22 that you really appreciate? So it isn't new, but it's new to you.
The book series called Discworld. I will explain it and it will sound ridiculous, and that is because it is intended to be ridiculous. The author is Terry Pratchett. I believe there are between 42 and 44 novels that comprise all of Discworld. It is a flat planet, a disc. It is on the back. It's held up by 4 elephants that are riding on the back of a giant turtle named Great Atuin, who is flying through space. These are kind of the answer to fantasy books that took themselves seriously. Mm-hmm. This is one that does not take itself seriously at all. It is the greatest level of absurdism and manages to have this political commentary that does not feel forced down your throat, but will make you stop and think. It's written in such a way that you can read any book in the series. There is one standalone that I would say to start with, and that is called Small Gods, about a god who used to be a big god because he was worshipped by many, and then he incarnates as a tortoise, a very small god, and he encounters one of his believers, and the story unfolds from there. And it's a great commentary on ancient and modern day religion, but it is also hilarious. I have never encountered a series of books where I have spent as much time laughing out loud while having an earbud in and wondering what people are thinking about me, because the books just have so many great lines.
Okay. Based on what you're saying, I'm curious if maybe there's some similarities between the Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy style, or is this completely different from that style?
He probably took some inspiration from it.
Okay.
And I think just in general seemed like the kind of guy who had that type of lens. This is a very British comedy
All right.
approach. If you like some of the old Beatles movies, I think the humor will hit really well.
Sounds great to me. My favorite Beatles movie is A Hard Day's Night. Help's okay. Yellow Submarine's funny at moments, and the other one is awful. I forget what the other one is. Magical Mystery Tour. It's complete garbage.
Help, I believe, is the one I liked. That's with Ringo and that atrocious ring.
Yes. Yep.
Right? I like that one.
All right. Okay. So that is something you discovered in 22 that didn't come out in 22. So it wasn't new, but it was new to you. In that category, when I was driving up to Wisconsin this past summer, I listened to a podcast about the history of coffee that came out in 21, but I discovered it in 22, and it is phenomenal. If you like history or like coffee, especially if you like both, you should give this a listen. The gentleman who hosts the podcast, oh my gosh, their names are going to escape me. Jonathan, it's in my memory. I'm gonna go. I'm not gonna check. James Harper and Jonathan Morris. James Harper. It's either James Harper or James Harbour and Jonathan Morris, and they cover the history of coffee all the way from when farmers were discovering their goats eating it and getting hyped up to present day, and the economics of coffee, the different types of coffee, and it's a fantastic podcast that I listened to while driving that was new to me but came out previously. That's a podcast. So that helps us transition to what are your favorite podcasts from 22 that are currently running in 22. They may have started previously, but they're currently running in 22. They are recommendations you have for podcasts that we're running, putting out new episodes in 22.
All right. My runner-up is a podcast called Intentionally Blank, and it is Brandon Sanderson, the author I mentioned before, and another author and friend of his named Dan Wells. It's called Intentionally Blank because their topics vary from episode to episode. There's this odd long-running theme where they try to always include news about a food heist. That you heard me correct, a food heist. Apparently there's a lot more of those in the world than I ever realized, because I feel like they tend to get one every week or two. That was my runner-up. My number one podcast that is putting out episodes in 22, new episode every week. It is called the Huberman Lab. It is hosted by Dr. Andrew Huberman. He is a professor at Stanford University, I believe. The topics he covers are mostly based in neuroscience, but they are widely diverse. You will, I guarantee, find a topic that you're interested in, and he goes very in-depth on the science, but he also manages to explain it in a way where it doesn't feel like it's a professor talking to you, even though it is, a sign that he's probably a really great professor. Huberman Lab, Huberman space lab, LAB. It is great, and it is incredibly informative.
As far as podcasts go, anyone who speaks to me on a regular basis has heard me recommend both of these podcasts. And the runner-up is, look, man, Star Trek is cool. Star Trek has always been cool. Star Trek will forever be cool. It's called Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. And it's a complete breakdown of the original series of Star Trek that has to do with its cultural impact today, its cultural impact when it came out, its forward-thinking allegory approach to storytelling, and its impact on the world. They not only do they break it down from a storytelling standpoint, but they break it down from a cultural standpoint, and it is tremendous. And it's highly entertaining. Each episode is usually between an hour and 2 hours. There are a lot of Star Trek fans who cannot watch the original series because they can't get past the budgets of the 60s. Well, this would be a great in hand with watching the original series, or a great alternative to the original series, because you're still going to understand the character development and impact. My runner-up is Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve as a podcast I highly recommend, especially if you're a Star Trek fan. probably specifically if you're a Star Trek fan. My number one podcast, though, has one of the same hosts. It is called The Cinephiles, and it's hosted by Steve Morris and John Roca, and it breaks down movies, and it breaks them down so well, and it goes into a deep dive. Right now they're doing It's a Wonderful Life, or they just finished It's a Wonderful Life, and I mean, the range of movies are like It's a Wonderful Life to big Marvel movies to sometimes they will do some unexpected movies like Zorro the Gay Blade, and other times they're gonna go into true cinema history like Citizen Kane. So there's a big difference between Zorro the Gay Blade and Citizen Kane. They cover a diverse segment of movies, and I really enjoyed it. If anyone is into theater, or they're into screenwriting, or they're into acting, or they're into learning to direct, or how films are made, there is probably not a better podcast than The Cinephiles.
It's a Wonderful Life was mentioned in that Intentionally Blank, because they were talking about Christmas movies.
Mm-hmm. As far as video games that were released in 22, released or re-released, I'm prefacing for my own speaking, as far as video games that were released or re-released in 22, what are the two you recommend, your honorable mention, and your number one video game released in 22 that you recommend?
Honorable mention is going to be God of War, Ragnarok. I beat the main game. I'm in the post game. They managed to turn Kratos into more than a one-dimensional character. It was a lot of fun before. He is great now. My number one, and this won't be a surprise based on one of the earlier answers, is going to be Eldin Ring. I admit I'm a fan of the Soulsborne games. I appreciate how challenging they are without feeling unfair. Eldin Ring feels like the culmination of all of those games, reaching this open world game where, unlike God of War, you do feel like a fairly nameless character thrown into this mix where there are gods and deities and demigods and all of these things fighting. And then here you are, this tiny little unheard of thing. Perhaps this will resonate with you if you think back to like the first time you played the original Legend of Zelda, or the Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, or a game like that where you don't get a lot of actual direction at the beginning of the game. So there's a lot of just feeling of exploration as you play through it. Eldin Ring is the first game in a very long time where I felt that feeling, and I felt that feeling for over 100 hours of playing the game.
Wow.
It is constantly introducing new and exciting things, and because the combat is so challenging, everything feels like a threat. So you can't just go running through and do whatever you want. You have to actually think about it and be careful. It is a masterpiece of a video game.
Okay, so your honorable mention video game of 22 was
God of War, Ragnarok.
And your number one recommended video game of 22 was
Eldin Ring.
All right. I would share my thoughts on those games, but I've not played either one of them. Much like maybe you haven't played the ones I'm about to recommend, but maybe you have. So my video games released in 22 or re-released in 22 that I highly recommend are The Last of Us, which was re-released for PlayStation 5 in 22. This is a tremendous game. In every incarnation, it has been tremendous. I'm talking about the first Last of Us. I've not played the sequel, but I have played the first one multiple times and at every difficulty level. And it is simply about The Last of Us. It's tense, and there's a reason I recommend it. It's great. And I don't get to play that many games in a year, so that when I do spend time with one, I want it to truly be great. And if it's not, I get disappointed. Gotham Knights. My number one video game of 22 is Stray. Is a game where you play as a cat trying to escape a robotic city. I know it sounds silly, and it is silly, but it's also great. So that's my number one recommendation for a game in 22 is Stray, is playing as this rather brilliant cat trying to get out of a robotic city. It's a lot of fun.
I've heard it affectionately called Cat Simulator. It's a fun game, and I have enjoyed the little bits of it that I have done.
Let's transition to novels, books that we recommend from 22.
I know. Let's see. My runner-up for novels will be one that I believe you have reviewed on this channel. It is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I have always liked Stephen King. I don't like everything that Stephen King writes. This one was a big hit for me. I love the characters. I love the story. I love the dog. My number one book for 2022 is called The Lost Metal. It is the fourth book of the second era of the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson.
I've heard that name somewhere before, maybe recently.
Yes, a few minutes ago.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Probably a couple times. I think he came up in the YouTube talk, and he came up in the podcast talk. And now he's coming up in the book talk, because he is, in fact, an author before he is those other things.
All right.
I can't get into too many details, because this is the seventh book following this planet. It's actually the second era of the Mistborn series. And if I were to recommend a place to start with Sanderson, I would recommend starting with the book called Mistborn, or if you find an older copy, it's actually called Mistborn: The Final Empire. His idea was to do a fantasy genre, but start where it's in like a medieval setting. So that's where books 1 through 3 are. A more medieval setting, and then you jump forward 300 years, so it's the same planet, and the events of those first 3 books have a large impact on beliefs, religions, society that is 300 years later. But this one, the next 4 books in this era too, are more like the end of the Wild West era. And then there are threats from gods that aren't the god of this planet. And I probably can't say much more than that, or it's going to get too deep into spoilers.
Okay. So we have the same runner-up. Stephen King's Fairy Tale is a very good book. My one complaint about it is I felt like the first 200 pages were a bit long-winded, but that's really about it. I truly enjoyed that book. My number one recommended book of 22, which I also did a review of on this channel, is A Mock by Barry Eisler. I really liked this book a lot. I like Barry Eisler's writing a lot. I haven't read all of his books, but I've read a lot of his books. And I'm not going to go into too much depth because I've already done a review of this book. But what it boils down to is it takes place in 91, and a Marine comes home, gets contracted out to do a job through a CIA-related group, not directly through the CIA, and it changes his view of himself, his family, and his world around him. I highly recommend it. So that's my favorite book of the year, is A Mock by Barry Eisler. Theatrical movie. You've got a theatrical movie from 22 that you really recommend? Or a couple of them?
I only have one, and that is The Batman. I agree that this could have been a Jason Todd story, and Robert Pattinson, I think, could have played Jason Todd. Mm-hmm. But as Bruce Wayne and the Batman, I think he did a fantastic job giving us a Batman that, to me, came off as a younger, more inexperienced Batman than Christian Bale did when he first played Batman. I really enjoyed how much more gritty this one felt. The way that it was shot complemented the entire just feel of the movie, where I felt so much more immersed. And I haven't been able to feel that from very many hero or superhero movies recently.
It's a good film. Matt Reeves did a phenomenal job with that feature. It is not my number one nor my runner-up, but I did truly enjoy that film. My runner-up for theatrical movie that I most recommend from 22 is Elvis. Not only because the soundtrack is so good, that's just a minor part of it. Tom Hanks gives a very good performance, but because Austin Butler gives the performance that most actors would spend their lifetime trying to achieve. It is absolutely a tremendous performance by Austin Butler as Elvis. That's really the primary reason it's my runner-up movie, is because of his performance. My number one film from 22 that I recommend, and this is a big blockbuster, and that's Top Gun Maverick, because it is a theatrical movie. It is a movie that is just a true joy to sit in a theater and watch. And so as far as a theatrical movie for a theatrical experience, I think it's the best of the year. Let's talk about television/streaming. Returning television show or streaming show in 22 that you recommend. What are your runner-up and your number one recommended television or streaming show of 22?
My runner-up is going to be The Owl House. I watched it with my kids on Disney Plus. It's one of the best kid-friendly shows that I think I've seen, where it is enjoyable enough that it's not, oh, I'm going to sit through this with my kids. It is oh, my kids and I are excited to watch the next episode of this show.
That's a ringing endorsement for a show, that you're looking forward to watching it with your kids and not be like, oh, let me sit down and watch this show with your kids. Wait, you know what I mean? That's a ringing endorsement for a show.
Yes, anytime I find something that fits that category, I make a note of it. My number one returning TV series or streaming series for 2022 is going to be Harley Quinn. It's a very different take on the Batman universe because Harley Quinn lets Harley Quinn be the main character. It's what I wish they would do with some other characters closely related to Batman, like Dick Grayson or Tim Drake. But because they are so close to Batman, I feel like they're always just tied to Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Harley Quinn has Batman in it, treats Batman very different from any other medium I've seen Batman in. But as a show, and I will put the warning out here, do not watch this one with your kids. It's extraordinarily violent. It's extraordinarily vulgar in all the best ways.
And this is on HBO?
Yes, it's streaming on HBO Max. There's a truly great episode with Harley and Bruce Wayne, and through a little bit of this, that, and the other, she ends up inside his head. And you might not know, but before she was Harley Quinn, Harleen Quinzel was a psychiatrist or psychologist. I think psychologist. So seeing her actually put that to use is just a nice little treat in a show that is otherwise very bombastic and bloody and, again, entertaining in all of the best ways when you let these characters star in their own show.
All right.
And truly be the star of that show.
I'll give it a whirl. I'm a big fan of the Batverse, so I'll give it a whirl. I don't know how I missed this. This seems like something I would watch, but there's just so much. Entertainment is not campfire television anymore. There's so much. That's why it's why I went. Yeah, it's why I wanted to do a video about recommendations, is because I hear about stuff. And I mean, speaking of it, if you're watching this, we want to hear your recommendations, because this is how word of mouth is the best way to find something good to watch, because you can't believe trailers. I don't know if that's news, but you can't believe trailers. Word of mouth. So leave your recommendations in the comments. Let's make this a conversation. Yeah, I don't know how I missed that, but I'll give it, sounds great.
It is great.
As far as returning television series or streaming shows, this is going to come as no surprise if you just watched the video I put out a few days ago. My runner-up is Jack Ryan. Jack Ryan is a great character who has been played by very good actors and is played to the absolute hilt currently by John Krasinski. The character is a former Marine, former professor, former financial analyst who is an absolute expert in all things financial, geopolitical, Soviet, Russian-related, Eastern European. He was an analyst, but is now a CIA case officer, and it is an extremely good series. They're on season 3. I've always appreciated the way Jack Ryan was first described to me as the thinking man's James Bond, and that's exactly the best description for him there is. This is a tremendous series, and I highly recommend it. But it's not my number one. My number one returning TV series, and this is going to come of no surprise who of anyone who has watched anything on the internet in the past several years, and that is Stranger Things. Season 4 is my number one returning series. It is absolutely fantastic. I'm not going to go into details because there's so many things that happen, but if you've seen any season, you know kind of the genre is that it's this science fiction horror / ode to the 80s that is absolute perfection in a rectangle. That's my number one. Let's talk about new television or streaming. This is a big one for me because in my viewing world, streaming / television has surpassed movie going in many ways. So this is my number one category, and that is new television or streaming series. What do you got? What do you recommend? What's your runner-up? And what's your number one recommended new television or streaming series from 22?
Speaking from just what I have seen and completed, my runner-up is going to be Wednesday on Netflix, starring Jenna Ortega, because she makes that show amazing, where otherwise I personally would say it is just okay. The plot is okay. The other actors are good and okay. Her portrayal of the character Wednesday Addams was a delight to see this character done so well. The creepy and the kooky balanced perfectly.
I like it.
Yes.
So what's your number one?
My number one is also from Netflix, and that is going to be The Sandman, the live-action adaptation of the going a ways back DC Comics, written by Neil Gaiman, and it is about the Sandman, or as he's known amongst those who know him, Morpheus, or just Dream. He's the anthropomorphic personification of our dreams. The comics were long considered to be something that was an amazing story that would be impossible to adapt into any kind of live action. I'm thrilled to see and to say they were wrong. They managed to show very comic book accurate, episode to episode, arc to arc, the Sandman, and didn't miss a beat. The series manages to capture everything that was in the comic and display it in a way that no one thought was possible.
Wow.
Because of that, and my own just appreciation for those comics, I have to recommend that as my number one new series of 2022.
I have the Audible version of Sandman saved to listen to, and I have the Netflix version marked to watch. I've not listened to the Audible version, nor have I watched the Netflix version, but they are both on my list, and I think you just moved them up my list.
The Audible versions are an amazing production as well.
Wow. Okay. All right. So my new television or streaming series. Now this, you and I have discussed both of these shows previously, so the order here may startle you, but not that either show is on this list. And my runner-up for best new streaming or television series of 22 is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is a series that takes place in between the Star Trek original series pilot and the first episode of Star Trek the original series, in that gap of years between the pilot and the first episode. And it is absolutely fantastic. We follow the adventures. I'm not going to go into too many details because I did a review of every single episode from the year, but it follows the adventures of Captain Pike and the senior officers of the Enterprise crew, including Spock and Una and La'an and others, as they explore strange new worlds and boldly go where no one has gone before. So it's a good show. It captures a lot of the adventure style of the original series and Next Generation. Those are the two it draws from heavily. There's also a little bit of Star Trek Enterprise mixed in there. Going forward, I hope it excels and moves and forges its own path in a much more dynamic way. Had it done that, it'd probably be my number one. My number one streaming or television series of 22 is hands down, not even a competition, Andor on Disney+. It takes Star Wars and turns it into something I always hoped Star Wars could be, true science fiction. It is absolutely phenomenal. If the Emmys do not acknowledge this show through a nomination process, choosing not to because it has the title Star Wars attached to it. This show is excellent. Andy Serkis deserves an Emmy nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and Diego Luna deserves an Emmy nomination for Best Actor. It is a tremendous show, and it takes Star Wars a place I have always hoped Star Wars would go. But sidebar, your kids may not like it because it's not full of space Muppets and laser swords. But it's great.
It's not all about space Muppets and laser swords.
No, it's not. And Andor appreciates that and takes it much further. Yes. I truly liked Andor. I think it's the best show. And again, what Diego Luna's eye acting, and I know that may sound strange, but his eye acting is exceptional in this. Because his character does a lot of absorbing the world around him, and you watch him process that information. There's not a lot of him standing there and pontificating. He leaves that to other characters. It's a truly tremendous show. And I love The Mandalorian for your more traditional Star Wars. But if you want to see Star Wars expand what it can be, Andor is the show. But before we go, Jeremy, we got to talk about what's something you're looking forward to in 23, or a couple of somethings you're looking forward to in 23 in the world of entertainment. As far as video games go, without a doubt, Tears of the Kingdom, the new Legend of Zelda game that comes out in 23. As far as movies go, the Creed 3 looks fantastic. I estimate I'm really gonna like that. And as far as television goes, probably Ahsoka. And as books go, Stephen King releases a book every year that I always look forward to. I don't know what his next one will be, but I'll like it, as does Michael Connelly. So I'm really hoping Michael Connelly releases a new Lincoln Lawyer novel, following the character of Mickey Holler. But, what are you looking forward to in 23 as far as entertainment?
23, I am, of course, looking forward to Tears of the Kingdom. As far as books go, I'll be waiting to see what Brandon Sanderson puts out, and I'll at least take note of anything Stephen King puts out.
When I talk about stuff I'm looking forward to, there was a time, many years, maybe even multiple decades in my life, where if you'd asked me what I was looking forward to, I would have always talked about the new Dean Koontz book coming out. And this is from when I was in high school for many, many years after. But it's not the case anymore. Now, more often than not, I either skip his books or I don't like them. Occasionally, there's a good one. But since Odd Thomas, there hasn't been a lot that I've loved. I mean, I started reading Koontz when I was in high school, loved all of that stuff, and then as an adult read the Odd Thomas books and loved that, but the stuff since then has been extremely hit and miss. Except for Nameless. Nameless was a good series. Nameless was a really good book series, and I heard that that it's going to get picked up as a streaming series.
I still like Dean Koontz, but he has been elbowed out of my list of favorite authors.
So, Jeremy, thanks for joining me to make a list of recommendations of entertainment that came out in 22 and to talk about what we're looking forward to in 23. If you liked this video, I ask you, please click like. If you'd like to see more videos like it, please click subscribe. And if you want to do me a favor, share this video with your friends. I'd really appreciate it. We'll talk soon.